Hello friends, welcome back to the Internet Creepypasta Iceberg. Today we'll be exploring the second layer, going just beneath the surface. So far we've heard stories that we all know, a few news stories, the lesser known hopefully, and a few hidden gems await you in this layer. Let's start our descent. This is the Internet Creepypasta Iceberg Volume 2. Necrosleep is one of the most well-known internet-based creepypastas. The story was uploaded in 2014 and written by Lemnyskate64. Necrosleep is about a man's blog and his attempts at never sleeping again. The story is told through the blog posts of a man named Reed Murdoch. His first post was on October 16, 2014, with the title being My Disconnected Life. In this first post, he introduces himself, explains that he's just moved out of his parents' basement, and is now trying to live his life in a crappy apartment. The apartment consists of a living room, kitchenette, a bathroom, and a closet. Even with so little, the upsides aren't so terrible. Reed says his expenses are so low that he can make enough to cover rent and food by simply doing random tasks online. He fills out surveys for political issues he knows nothing about, and writes reviews for items he's never used. It made enough to live off of, and he even got to stay inside, which was a huge plus. He'd always been a bit of a recluse. This was the end of his first blog post. He says that he will be updating it every day or two. It wouldn't take longer than 2 days before his next post. It would go up on October 18th. The post starts with Reed telling the readers his plans. He's updating the blog at 3 a.m., and this is for good reason. He's planning to shift to a full nocturnal sleep schedule. His reasons for doing so are pretty simple. Better internet after midnight, less people out, sunlight gives you cancer, and it's a free country, so social norms be damned. His final reasoning is because of a new forum he found called Nocturnal Underground. The forum was comprised of people that hated the daytime and recluses. It was a tight-knit community that preferred the internet after dark. Which, as he reminds his readers multiple times, the internet is more interesting after dark. The next post came on October 21st, and it seemed that Reed was getting accustomed to his new nocturnal lifestyle. There was one weird thing though. He'd received an odd message from an email named Revelation666. This is that email in full. To Reedman07, from Revelation666. Subject, Necrosleep.net. Congratulations, Reedman07. You've been invited to an invitation-only website that will change your life forever. Discover what society doesn't want you to know at Necrosleep.net. User exclusive invitation code to enter, DCLXVI. Find out what you've been missing your entire life. Necrosleep.net. Weirded out but also intrigued, Reed continued to the site. The page came up blank, but he found out that he could type in the middle. He inputted the invitation code he received and found a very odd-looking website. The website was in Russian, but luckily his browser auto-translated it for him. It was a pretty shady and generic-looking site. The font was Courier, it looked more like Notepad than a website, and the background was just black with white text. Here's an excerpt from the main page. Welcome to Necrosleep.net. This website is invitation only. Selected visitors have exclusive access to our special product that will change your life forever. Necrosleep is a product that safely negates the biological necessity of sleep, thanks to our miraculous secret formula. With one pill a day, you will never feel the need to sleep again. Try it for yourself by clicking the purchase link. If Necrosleep doesn't change your life, we will offer you a complete refund. Your astonishment is guaranteed. The text continued. Necrosleep is comprised of special and rare ingredients, which we cannot disclose in order to ensure that our formula stays in private hands. In order to keep our product available, it can only be distributed through alternative means on an exclusive basis. The active ingredients in Necrosleep has been sought after for years by doctors and scientists intending to displace sleep with wakefulness. Only we have managed to do what others could not, as permitted by the will of our master. We can assure you with full confidence that our product will change your life. You will never feel the need to sleep again. Feel free to indulge in our secret. it was clear that whatever they were selling was illegal. He clearly didn't care for the law, as he frequently used illicit substances. The whole vibe just felt wrong. A section titled Credit caught Reed's eye. After clicking on it, Reed was met with a tall man in a lab coat. If the man wasn't standing up straight, you'd think he was dead. He was gaunt with a blurry look in his eyes. He was credited with creating Necrosleep. That is what the site said. Credit for the pioneering of Necrosleep goes to the brilliant Dr. Hale A. Stan, proxy of our master and founder of the Ukrainian Institute of Occult Medicine. His work lives on. Occult medicine was a phrase that really made Reed question exactly what he was looking at. Even so, he clicked the purchase link out of curiosity. He then found another reason not to purchase the pills. They were $130 US per pill. It wasn't like he was going to try them before, but that was a crazy amount. We cut to the next post, and Reed has started a thread on Nocturnal Underground to see if anyone else has heard of Necrosleep. The chat was pretty lively as soon as he posted. A back and forth between 5 members ensued. They all told him basically the same thing though, not to trust the website or the product. They also were all pretty intrigued though, and asked for screenshots. It turned out that the website could only be seen if you were invited. This meant that none of them could enter it, and so he went back and grabbed screenshots for them. This cemented their stance on not continuing the search of the website. A day later, Reed received a message from an admin. They said that there was no user with the name provided. The only way they could have sent a message to him was if they bypassed the client somehow. This meant they had to hack the site just to send him spam. The next post had Reed doing some independent research on what Necrosleep might be. He found old YouTube videos, a few garage bands, and a post from fastmd.com. The post was deleted, of course. His search eventually led him to an old gaming forum. Someone was asking if anyone had tried Necrosleep yet. He was thinking about trying it so he could stay awake longer and work on his virtual farm, on some obscure medieval strategy game. No one had any idea what he was talking about. They said that the site didn't exist or didn't work, for the same reason that it hadn't for the others in the community. The site did give out the same code though. At least this person had the same exact code as the one he'd received. He ended up taking the pills and showed the progress of his crops. It was insanely far ahead of where he'd been prior, in a way that was almost impossible unless he didn't need to sleep. The forum's admins banned him for botting his farm, still not believing him in the end. A few days later, Reed received another PM from Revelation 666. This is what the message said. To Reedman07, from Revelation 666. Subject, necrosleep.net/backdoor. Congratulations, Reedman07. You've been selected to receive a free 30-day trial of Necrosleep. Claim your exclusive reward at necrosleep.net/backdoor. Find out what you've been missing your entire life, risk-free. necrosleep.net/backdoor. Reed uploaded this email to another thread on the forum. He was met with concerns and groans that he shouldn't trust it. He did say that he ordered the pills to a P.O. box and was just curious if it was a scam or not. If the pills arrived, he'd promised that he wouldn't try them unless he found out they were safe from another source. The other members, including an admin, stated their concerns again, but were also curious about the pills. Reed told them that he was done updating this thread and would be posting everything on his blog if they were interested. With that, he signed off for the night. It turned out not to be a prank by the admins, like he assumed for a minute. Only time would tell if he even received the pills or not. On the 30th of October, he updated his blog again. He had received the pills, 30 of them, tiny black capsules of Necrosleep. The envelope with the pills had no return label and was rather fishy looking. The blank envelope had a smaller envelope on the inside. The word Necrosleep was written on it, as well as storing instructions. They need to be stored in a cool, dark place for maximum potency. On the 31st of October, Reed began research into the creator of Necrosleep, Dr. Hale A. Stan. He actually had a Wikipedia page dedicated to him. He was a Soviet researcher from Ukraine that conducted experiments where he tried to revive, or keep alive, decapitated animals. He was later sentenced to prison for conducting these experiments on live human subjects. Further evidence into his crimes would lead to him being executed through lethal injection. This was a turning point for Reed. Up until this point, he just thought this was a spam email from someone trying to scam his credit card. What it turned into was a chance to change his life. He believed that he was chosen for a reason. The next day he posts this to his blog. November 1st, 2014. I'm holding the pill in my hand, ready to take it at a moment's notice. I've been thinking hard about this. I know it's not the safest thing to do, but I'm a risk taker. If this turns out badly, I don't have much to live for anyway. Life is nothing without danger, and I want to know the motives of these people more than anything. I need to know what they want from me. I need to know what I'm missing. There's only one way to find out. 2 days later, he would come back. November 3rd, 2014. I can't believe it. It's actually working. I haven't slept in 3 days, and I don't even feel remotely tired. Holy hell, I've never felt so focused and stimulated in my life. I don't know what's in this stuff, but it works. I don't know how long it's going to work exactly, so I'm not getting my hopes up. But the claim is that I'll never need to sleep again. Ever. So far, so good. Reed continues with another blog post saying that 4 days on, the pills are still working. He hasn't needed to sleep at all. He feels so much more productive. The only downside is his new aversion to light. The sunlight coming through the window gave him migraines, so he covered them with cardboard and duct tape. There was a symbol on the inside of the envelope, and it scared Reed enough to consider stopping the pills. The next day, about 30 minutes after when he'd normally take his pill, he got a massive headache. He held off for an hour before he got to the point that he needed to take them again, and so he did. Even with the aversion to light, Reed was seeing some upsides to the pills. He was remarkably more productive, he was better with numbers for some reason, and actually making a killing with online gambling. He felt more awake than he ever had before. The downside also started to show themselves at this point. The first odd occurrence was with a reflective set of eyes that appeared out of nowhere. He focused on them for a little bit before looking down at his cat. When he looked back up, they were gone. Reed comes to a terrible realization that he's going to need to get food soon. The thought scared him for some reason. He's never liked going out, but never feared it before. None of his friends were answering his messages, so it was likely he'd have to go out at some point. One of his friends finally responded. Jake agreed to get his food as long as he came out to club with them. They hadn't seen him in a while and were starting to get worried. He refused. The idea of leaving his house, his safe abode, terrified him more and more every day. Reed had another strange experience. He now had his TV on in the background at all times. He really needed the white noise. This helped a bit with the weird feeling he got from always being awake. A show called Bucko's Garden was on TV. It was a kids' show that he remembered enjoying until he got old enough to realize it was all mindless and nonsensical. At one point, he found himself in a trance staring at the TV. It was a Thanksgiving-themed episode, which made sense given the time of year. The usual stuff was happening. Talking animals getting the supplies for supper, talking to the camera, some happy-go-lucky music playing, the usual. The show was the usual nonsense, until Bucko reached into the oven. He pulled out a human fetus and slapped it onto the table. This grossed out Reed enough to look away from the TV. He couldn't believe that this was allowed on TV. Reed was starting to feel that he couldn't trust his eyes. He felt that he had to do a double take on everything he was seeing. He forgot his PC login multiple times. He changed it, wrote it down, and then forgot where he wrote it down. Things were getting progressively worse as he saw eyes everywhere. He walked into the bathroom to take a shower and saw something staring at him through his mirror. It stood behind him, staring perfectly still. When he turned around, he saw nothing. This is the first time that he considered the pills were screwing with his mind. He started to hear voices, all day, every day. The voices told him things. Things that he should do, things that he shouldn't do. It was all he knew. Every second of every day was filled with the voices. They wanted him to do something, but he didn't know if he could. The story takes a bit of a shift from here, as instead of reading Reed's blog, we're instead reading a police report. Reed had been shot and killed while attacking his father. He had ripped the man's head open and was starting to eat his brain tissue. He was warned multiple times to stop before police took the shot. An autopsy revealed that there was a microscopic black parasite that was eating away at his brain. The type of parasite they were was unknown at the time of the autopsy. The pills that he had been taking were tested and found to be the source of the parasites. They were eggs that would hatch when digested. The source of the pills was ascertained, but the website turned out to not exist. To this day, officials have no idea where he got those pills, or what Necrosleep could even mean. Necrosleep is a pasta that I think serves as one of the best in the internet computer subgenre. It hits all the notes perfectly to create an engaging, semi-believable, and unnerving story. Looking a little deeper could break that immersion, but it's not so much supernatural, rather a little out there. The few mentions of satanic imagery was kind of cheesy, but didn't take me out of the story. I will say that I would have liked a bit more on what the parasites could have been. It felt to me like a story in a series, like there were supposed to be other stories related to it, and this was just one of them. If you're up for a late night read, this story is an excellent place to take a dive into internet creepypastas. Actually, I recommend you specifically read this story when the sun has already gone down and you're all alone. It really enhances the story. I Have Thin Walls is a story posted originally on Necrosleep in 2014. It would be posted to the Creepypasta wiki later in 2018. The story was written by Alex Isaacs and starts with an unnamed narrator telling us he always planned to sleep by midnight, but always stayed up until 3 a.m. He would spend his time on the internet, like most of those that prefer to be nocturnal. He would watch videos, browse forums, do whatever. He always had a pair of headphones on and cherished the moment when he would finally take them off. It was the most freeing experience to him, because they always made his ears sore. As he removed his headphones, that's when he heard voices. He lived in an apartment with thin walls, so hearing his neighbors was nothing new. It was 3 a.m. and both of his neighbors worked at 4, so they got up around this time to start their day. He hated how loud they were. He could hear them doing everything. The narrator is a pretty light sleeper, and they would always wake him up. This is why he had some sleeping pills in his bathroom cabinet. He got up to go get them, but just as he left the room, the voices stopped. Maybe he would need them after all, and went back to his room. As soon as he laid down, he heard the voices again. They sounded quieter, more muffled. He got back up to grab the pills, and as soon as he left the room, the same thing happened. Complete silence and no voices. The narrator grabbed the pills and headed back to bed. He sat for a second and waited. The voices started up again. He decided that he would just take the pills and go to sleep. He turned to unplug his laptop, first unplugging the headphones. The voices stopped. Realization set in. It was actually Sunday. Neither of his neighbors worked today. The voices appeared to be coming from his laptop. He opened it and checked to see what could have been playing, but saw nothing. He began to panic as he plugged his headphones back in and put them on. The narrator tried listening to what the voices were saying. A browser opened on his PC, startling him. It went straight to a website. At least, he thought it was a website. The voices started to speak more clearly now. It sounded like 2 or more people were talking. He doesn't know yet, one of the voices said. He will in a little bit, give it time, another replied. I think he is catching on, said a third. He'll have no choice but to join us. Curiosity always gets the better of humans. Now, start it now. The screen flickered to life and a video began. The narrator was startled again, as he was staring at a human face that he thought was his own, but no, it wasn't. The voices told him that they can see him, and that he can respond to them. Can he see me? Asked the narrator. No, only hear you, one of the voices replied. The person was just like the narrator had been. He wore headphones and appeared to be reading or examining something really closely. So closely that he wouldn't notice the voices speaking softly. Here's an excerpt from the end of the story. We don't see him yet, said one of the voices. We can only see you. Can you tell us when he finally realizes where the voices are coming from? He doesn't know yet, I said. He will in a little bit. Give him time, said one of the voices. I think he is catching on, said another. I Have Thin Walls is a pretty unique story. The idea of being watched by others while browsing the internet is a real fear that many have. Somehow hearing voices so low that they become background noise as well is a great use of a creep factor. The ending of the story makes it seem like it's a never-ending cycle of finding people that watch others. Every time someone new is found, they only notice the voices as whispers. As soon as they recognize the voices, they are then free to join them. Honestly, I wasn't too scared by the story. I like the concept a bit, and as someone who has a fear of being watched, this kinda works for me. The one line that kinda makes me curious is the line about humans. Are these beings that are watching not humans? If not, then what exactly is watching us through our computers? And moreover, why does it want others to watch along with them? The SCP Foundation is making their first appearance on this iceberg. There are quite a few internet technology-based stories that can be found on the wiki. The one that most interests me is SCP-1471. Here's a brief description of the SCP. SCP-1471 is a 9.8 megabyte application for mobile devices named Myuu version 1.0.0 in online application stores. SCP-1471 has no listed developer and is somehow able to bypass the application process to go directly to distribution. SCP-1471 is also able to avoid removal by other program manager applications. After SCP-1471 is installed, no icons or shortcuts are created for the application. SCP-1471 will then begin to send the individual images through text messaging every 3 to 6 hours. All images will contain SCP-1471 Alpha, either within the background or foreground. SCP-1471 Alpha appears as a large humanoid figure with a canid-like skull and black hair. During the first 24 hours following the installation of SCP-1471, the mobile device will receive images taken at locations commonly frequented by the individual. After 48 hours, the mobile device will receive images taken at locations that were recently visited by the individual. After 72 hours, the mobile device will receive images of the individual in real time with SCP-1471 Alpha appearing within close proximity to the subject. Individuals with greater than 90 hours of exposure to these continuous images will begin to briefly visualize SCP-1471 Alpha within their peripheral vision, reflective surfaces, or a combination of the two. Continued exposure to SCP-1471 after this point will cause irreversible and sustained visualizations of SCP-1471 Alpha. Individuals at this stage have reported periodic attempts made by SCP-1471 Alpha to visually communicate with them, but fail to understand or comprehend these actions. Currently, the only known treatment to reverse SCP-1471's effects is to eliminate the individual's visual exposure to these images prior to 90 hours after installation. To date, no apparent hostile activity has been reported regarding SCP-1471 Alpha. This is essentially an SCP that haunts any person that comes into contact with their app. The app can be found on any app store, and if you were to run into it, this would be what the description says. 4. Redacted. Never settle for those awkward feelings of being alone ever again. Myuu is an exciting and interactive experience that will keep you engaged and intrigued. The anxiety of social situations can be nerve-wracking, but after just a few hours of Myuu, you will soon forget all about those painful emotions of disappointment. Be part of the new craze that is quickly becoming the next social substitute. Remember, the more you participate, the more Myuu will engage you. Your experience is completely up to you. Absolutely no ads. Enjoy. It is important to note that SCP-1471 Alpha has never been seen acting aggressively towards anyone. This does not mean that you should seek the app out. The motivations of 1471 Alpha are still unknown to this day. ThreeQuestions.net is a story that comes from Reddit, but not from the usual places. This story comes from the Clancypasta Reddit page, which is dedicated to a fellow YouTuber and horror narrator, Clancypasta. The story received a little attention on Reddit, but gained a decent viewership on YouTube. The story starts with our narrator named Jonathan, explaining that he had a very gullible friend. His friend's name was Thomas, and he was about as gullible as you can get. He would always go onto websites that stated he'd won something, or that promised secrets to questions he had. As far as that went, he would usually walk away with a virus, one that Jonathan would have to clean from his computer later. This was the extent of their friendship. Jonathan found him annoying, but overall not a bad guy. He just let himself fall for just about anything. While eating lunch one day, Jonathan is interrupted by Thomas. He says that he found a really interesting website that John had to check out. The website was called ThreeQuestions.net. It was simple, really. You ask a bot on this website 3 questions, all of which will be answered truthfully, and then the bot asks a question in return. There was a catch to the question, though. You had to answer the question the bot asked truthfully and correctly, or else bad things will happen to you. This was something ominous, but John doubted that a bot could really do anything to harm him. John also doubted that this website wasn't just some Trojan virus, trying to steal his credit card numbers or backdoor his computer. This is something that has happened before, thanks to another website that Thomas had him check out. The day ended and the boys went their separate ways. John got home, ate some spaghetti his mom made, and then went up to his room. He spent his time browsing YouTube and other sites until he was bored of it all. The thought of 3questions.net came to his mind, and he finally decided that he might just indulge his friend. John logged into the website, which turned out to be very simple. It had a chat box and some rules written next to it. You had to number the questions and you only got to ask 3. It was essentially what Thomas had explained at school. John started to type in the chat box. A response came in from Anonymous R. It read, "Hi, I'm the question bot, and any question you ask will be answered with accuracy and efficiency. Now, what is your first question?" The way the bot typed was weird. Could it really answer any question correctly? That seemed beyond believable. Even more so, when John asked how it knew these questions, it answered that it knew everyone and everything. Fine. The first question from John said, "How well do you know me, stupid bot?" The bot responded nearly immediately. Anonymous R. You're Jonathan Reese Baker, 18 years old, currently living on 14 Pinewood Drive with your mother, Mary Baker. Your father went missing 10 years ago, and you still hold on to his last letter to you, wishing for the day when he would come back and tell you where he has been, even though I'm afraid he cannot do that anymore. Your best friend is Thomas Sheridan, and he has talked to me yesterday. But I'm afraid to say that he has precisely 3 minutes 50 seconds ago failed to answer my question correctly, and... John slammed his laptop closed. There was no way this bot could know this much about him, yet it did, and all of that was correct. He was too afraid to open his laptop for the rest of the night. The next day at school, John didn't see Thomas in class. That's when he heard from the authorities what happened. Thomas was dead. His body had been found in his room, bloody and mangled. They had no idea what had happened to him. There was also his laptop, which had been completely destroyed. The only lead they had to go off of was the laptop, which they believed had exploded, and that's what had killed Thomas. John had just remembered what the bot had said. Thomas had answered the question wrong. Could he have been killed by the bot? He raced home from school, turned on his laptop, and continued back to the site. John asked the bot why it killed Thomas. The answer he got was the one he expected. It killed him because he answered the question wrong. In anger, John asked his final question. Can you prove to me that you're real? The response came in. I can try. The bot left the session and John sat there in silence. There was an unease in the air, but he wasn't sure what to expect really. He heard his mother calling him down to dinner. Brushing his feelings aside, he got up and headed downstairs. As he descended the stairs, he saw his mom. Wait, that wasn't his mother. Her eyes were pitch black and she spoke to him in a different voice. Now, Jonathan Reese Baker, it is time for you to answer my question. I'm always watching you, never faltering, always knowing I am the Reaper of Souls, the all-knowing being, the judge of your fate. I am your God. Who am I? John screamed out the first thing that came to his mind. You're Lucifer, the devil, he said. The thing smiled and said yes. It wished him a good day before leaving his mom's body. She crumbled to the ground in a heap. It was clear that she didn't survive the possession. John gives one final warning about 3questions.net. If you ever find the website, do not go and ask it questions. You will not like the answers you get. You will not like the questions you get asked. 3questions.net is kind of a hard story to talk about. On one hand, I like the premise of a bot answering questions for you. I don't really enjoy the execution, and I'm not a huge fan of the devil being used here. The devil is a frequent character in my Ritualpasta Iceberg, so I've seen enough of him to last me a lifetime. The story here lacks a lot of things that make a good creepypasta. The build-up isn't there, and the ending lacks luster. The reading of this story by Clancy Pasta is great though, so if you want to experience this story for yourself, check out his channel. It does a better job of telling the story than the actual post does. Findagrave.com is a short creepypasta posted to the wiki in 2012. The story focuses around the real website findagrave.com. We'll talk about the website after the story. Findagrave.com opens with a narrator saying that they were screwing around at school. Instead of working on the PowerPoint they were supposed to finish, they were looking through the website links on their school's homepage. One website caught their eye, and it was called www.findagrave.com. The website confused them, but they clicked on it anyway. It was a simple website with a very interesting premise. It's a website that allows you to look at deceased individuals' grave records. This included when they died and a picture of their gravestone. This is super weird. Who had taken a picture of all these gravestones, he thought. The narrator went home and told their mom about the site. Their mom waved her off, clearly not taking it too seriously. They asked her mother who took the photo of their great-grandma's gravestone, but she had no idea. Later that night, the narrator decides to go to the website again. All of their internet friends had gone to sleep, and no one was around to keep them company. It was getting late, but they'd made a poor choice and drank an entire liter of Coke, and now couldn't sleep even if they wanted to. They browsed the site more in depth than they had at school, looking for the names of celebrities that had passed, close relatives, and the like. This is when they decided to look up their own name, which is never a good idea. The narrator typed in their name and looked at the results. People with similar names popped up, 4 to be exact. They were all in states relatively close to the one they lived in. They had all died before the narrator was born, but with each page they explored, the date got closer. Eventually they refreshed the page and found that there was actually 5 results now. Curiously, they continued to the 5th page. The birth year was the same as theirs. Next to the birth year was tomorrow's date. The included photo was a picture of them in their room with someone standing behind them in the darkness. Findagrave.com is a pretty standard creepypasta. It's quick to tell its story and move on to the surprise ending. Now, the website that it's referring to actually exists. It's a website where you can search the death records of those that have been submitted to the site. It's kind of unnerving to see images of the deceased on the website like this. Some of the deceased have images of their gravestones, while others will have images of themselves. It's kind of a morbid curiosity, but the website says it exists in order to honor those that have passed. The story was fine in most cases, though a little cliche in others. I find it still a fun read to find browsing the internet late into the night. Read this before the authorities take it down as a story that was posted onto the Creepypasta subreddit in 2018. The story was written by Lord Kobito and has a man coming to terms with the fact that he knows too much. The story starts with the narrator talking about his searches for something. What he is specifically looking for isn't mentioned. What he does mention is that the NSA has hacked his computer 7 times in the last 10 years, leading him to hopping from hotel to motel to campsites. He mustn't be caught by the US government and needs to know the answers to every question he has. The narrator's search for answers through the medium of the internet started back in 2003. The internet was young then, less widely used, and far less commercially so. They claimed to have been a member of a forum that knew a little too much about the world. In such, the server was taken down by the government. Many of the members were hushed with non-disclosure agreements, and others are rotting away in secret government prisons. This is when the narrator describes an image he found, the one that really started all of this. Even though everyone he tried to tell has called him a schizophrenic, he says it's all real. You just have to believe him. The photo in question was of a woman giving birth to an alien-like creature. The image was clearly a still from a video, one that he didn't have access to. Underneath the image were other members of the forums, all reacting to it. Some were in disbelief that a creature like that could exist. That was the popular take, as others weighed in with their lack of understanding of what it could be. Even still, there were others that claimed Photoshop was the culprit. The narrator stayed in that discussion all night. He sifted through thousands of comments. There was even one from a troll pretending to be a rogue member of the central government. He claimed that they were experimenting where humans were mixed with the DNA of the remains of the aliens from the Roswell incident. This is what led to the creatures seen in the image. While the narrator was skeptical at first, he now believes that he may have been right. Continuing through the thread, there was even a journalist from the Boston Globe. They claimed they were going to write an article titled, "Internet Mystery, Hoax or Highlight?" Though this story would never see the light of day, which is to be expected with what he knew now. The original thread was deleted. A new thread was created by the same poster, and soon that thread was also deleted. Every time a new one would go up, it would just as quickly be removed. 5 minutes had passed, and the entire forum no longer existed. It was gone, as if it never had existed. The next day, the narrator got a phone call from a strange number. They were told to report to the FBI office in Chelsea, Massachusetts. They were told to check their email. The address would be inside, he was told. He turned on his computer and saw 2 emails. The first was from the FBI member in Chelsea. It listed where the building was, as well as the detours they need to take in order to avoid the massive snowstorm currently outside. The second email was from an address named 4chan.anon666@rocketmail.com. The email read, "To whom it may concern, do not turn yourself in, for they plan to arrest you upon arrival. Pack as much as you can and escape by boat. If you cross into Mexico or Canada, the marshals will still find you. If you are reading this, then you are on the no-fly list. Run." Of course, he didn't want to believe some random person that had found his email online, but for some reason, he did. Much to the chagrin of his parents, since his childhood therapist diagnosed him with delusional disorder and paranormal schizophrenia, they were wrong, of course. The narrator claimed to believe the email for one specific reason. As he'd finished reading it, dots of lights appeared outside of his window. Clearly, the government was already watching him. He packed a few belongings under the watch of the strange lights and headed towards Canada. His plan was to make it to Canada, then fly out of there towards the Dominican Republic. There he would be safe from the US government. The plan had failed though, since he's actually on the Canadian no-fly list as well. This has led to him hiding away in Canada, while the US and Canadian authorities try to find him. The narrator believes that even if he escapes the authorities, he knows that those lights will continue to follow him. No matter where he goes, he is being watched. His only hope is to spread his story to as many places as possible, in hopes that it becomes a copypasta. The text will be taken down by the government, undoubtedly. That's why he hopes to spread it to as many places as possible, so that everyone can know that these creatures exist, that the government doesn't want us to find out. This story follows a lot of your usual government conspiracy stories. For that, I actually like it a lot. The most interesting part to me, though, is that the original story is now deleted, as is the user that posted it. Touches like that, outside of the story itself, really make my enjoyment of the story that much more. Why I Never Used Street View on Google Maps is a story that was uploaded to the No Sleep subreddit in 2021. The story was written by Pickle Jar Potatoes and is another story that uses Google Maps as its premise. There are a few of these stories, namely Satellite Images, Google Maps 3D, and Apple Maps. The 2 latter stories we'll be covering later on in this iceberg. This particular subgenre of internet-based creepypasta is one that I've slowly started to love. I used to be someone who would browse Google Maps when I was bored. I even played GeoGuessr a few times. I'm surprised no one has made a creepypasta about that yet. The story opens with the poster claiming that they never use the Street View function on Google Maps anymore. When he has to explain to his friends why he doesn't, usually he states that he likes to see things for himself first. The poster continues to when he'd first found out about Google Maps. He was playing games on his school computer, specifically Fireboy and Watergirl on coolmathgames.com. This is when one of his friends asked him if he's ever heard of Google Maps. "Yeah, my parents use it all the time," he replied. "But did you know you can actually see the places on the map? Like you were actually there," his friend replied. The two 12-year-olds talked about it for a second before deciding to try the Street View feature for themselves. The poster's friend asked where he wanted to look, and he said why not check out the school. His friend groaned before complying and dropping the little figure near their school. The school looked just like it did in real life. The poster was mesmerized by the images before him. He could see the broken swings on the playground and everything. His friend then dropped the figure on his own address. He could see his friend's house, and it almost felt like he was actually there. Everything was exactly as it was, true to reality. After school, the poster rushed home and continued on with his day. He played flash games with a snack from the pantry and found that he was starting to get bored. His parents wouldn't be home until late, so he really didn't need to get off his computer anytime soon. Google Maps came to his mind. It was something that he found to be really interesting, especially the Street View feature. This time he would search up his own address and see what his house looked like. The poster input his address and dropped the man on his street. It came up like it did at school. It happened to look just like his home. The details were exactly right, except there was something off. Around his side gate, there was a man in a hoodie. He tried to zoom in on his face, but found that he could only see the back of his head. The side gate led into the backyard, and that was starting to unnerve him. The poster got up from his chair and was starting to freak himself out. He ran to the side window and looked out. There wasn't anyone there, naturally. Why would there be? He came back to the computer and jump scared himself. The man's face was now taking up the entire screen. He had a cartoonishly large smile and bulging eyes. The worst part, though, is he never zoomed the camera up to his face like that. Zooming out instantly, the rest of the man's body was now in view. He was tall and lanky, but crooked. He didn't seem normal. It was close, but slightly off. It was off in a way that many would call uncanny. The Street View images stated that they had all been taken months ago, so there was no way this man stood outside right now. The poster kept trying to reason with himself that there was no way. He got up to check again, and once again there was no one. Returning to his computer, the man moved again. This time he was staring directly at the screen with his hand out of his hoodie pocket. The hand was in a thumbs down gesture. The smile widened. It was inhuman. Fearing the man would move again, the poster didn't take his eyes off the screen. A wicked blue appeared on the screen. The computer had decided for him. It was the blue screen of death, and the only fix was to unplug the PC. He restarted it, hoping that the man hadn't moved in his time away from Google Maps. It booted with the old Windows XP logo. It was taking too long. The man could be there by now. As it loaded, the sound of jiggling from his front door shook him to his core. He froze. There was no way he could be safe in his room. Not if the man could get through his locked front door so easily. The jiggling intensified, and his heart could be heard in his ears. Just as he started to close his door, he heard his mom announce that they were home. He ran downstairs to hug both of his parents, then dragged them upstairs to show them Google Maps. He loaded back into their street and saw that there was no one there. It just showed their house, like it normally would. This story does an excellent job building the tension of what might be lurking outside. This isn't anything new, as we've heard the same type of story told before. I do like the way this one is told, though, through the lens of a child. Children tend to scare themselves more with little to go on. I was like this when I was a child. I had a very overactive imagination, which made creepypastas the perfect story type for me. Being scared with the bare minimum to go off of is kind of my whole thing. I just like to imagine something getting closer, something that can only be seen through the lens of Google. Something that makes its way towards your door. It's just something to think about. Chatroom 98 is the next story on the iceberg. It's one that I feel I've heard many times before. The story is about a man named David that finds a CD-ROM with a strange program on it named Chatroom 98. The story was published to the Creepypasta Wiki in 2011 by Snevitz. There isn't an author attached to the story, but it isn't listed as anonymous either. The whole story takes place in England. The Creepypasta opens with David saying that he's doing some cleaning. He's just finishing his degree and was ready to throw away all the useless homework and other stuff that he had no use for anymore. It was supposed to be a cathartic experience, but instead he finds a jewel case amongst his stuff. There was a CD-ROM on the inside with the words Chatroom 98 written on them in black marker. This was odd, as most chat rooms didn't come in this format. They were usually browser-based or downloadable at the very least. Curiosity got the better of him, and he popped the CD into his computer. It booted up fine, and he found himself with a very primitive-looking red box chat room. The words "Welcome to Chatroom 98" appeared on screen, and he typed in the available space. "Hello." A response came quickly. "Good afternoon." The message came from a user named Darwin Clark. It appeared to be a real person, at least on the surface. That didn't seem possible, though. This was a CD-ROM with a very unknown chat room program. Could another person actually be using this? He concluded that it was most likely a bot. Also, it was just dawning on him, where did this disk even come from? He had lived in his house for 6 years now, and had no idea why or how it ended up in his things. The previous owners must have left it behind. He started the chat with, "Lovely weather we're having." The bot responded, "No, it seems rather miserable today." That was odd. The weather actually wasn't that great outside. It appeared to be about to rain. This could still be a coincidence. He lived in England after all. Rain was practically the norm there. David shook it off and asked another question. "So what are your favorite movies?" A pretty innocuous question. Another response appeared on screen. "I prefer the theater." This is a weird bot, but it didn't respond in a way that really gave away what it could be. The questions continued, with the bot saying that it was born in 1867 and hated its 2 sisters. David responded by saying his name was Jesus and that he had 2 brothers that were aliens. The bot seemed to humor him, but then it changed its tone. It said it had done something terrible to its 2 sisters. which David continued to joke with it, asking if it knew what his brothers had done lately. "You were an only child, David," it responded. This is when David knew that it wasn't just some simple bot. It knew things, and it was telling the story of what happened to its sisters. It described what had happened. Finally, it typed, "Look behind you." David did so, and was relieved to see nothing. When he turned back around, there was a face on screen. It stared at him with malice. He fell backwards in his chair and fell unconscious. David continued his story. Apparently he was now in the hospital. He had passed out, and when he came to, he was in a hospital bed. He had no recollection of how he got there, though. He was writing this story on a laptop that he was able to borrow. David complains of a headache that he feels now might be permanent. He was on loads of painkillers, but nothing seemed to help. He was now finishing uploading this story around 4:30 in the morning, which he said, as soon as he was done uploading it, he was going to find an open window on the 3rd floor. He couldn't take this headache anymore. Chatroom 98 is a story that I didn't find very interesting. It was one that I've heard many times before, but something about reading it instead of hearing it made it less interesting. The whole plot takes a weird turn and it's not very scary. I feel like it could have been written a bit better as well. The whole ending and even before that with the face on screen just didn't invoke the kind of terror that the author likely hoped it would. It just wasn't built up properly to have that fear factor. Laughing.wmv is a pasta that was uploaded to the wiki in 2013. It was uploaded by Turbo Swag and is an interesting time capsule of the year it came out. It makes mentions of Windows 8's tablet-like layout and other things. The story begins with a guy named Cody, who explains that he is the guy that you've seen that appears to be glued to his laptop. He takes it everywhere with him, to bed, to the dinner table, and just about everywhere. Though now, he doesn't even own a laptop. 3 months prior to this story's upload, he got a new laptop. It wasn't anything special, just your run-of-the-mill laptop. He got it for cheap. He even got Windows 8 on it, which he would later revert to 7 with the help of a friend. Nothing was wrong with the laptop. It was as clean a start for it as you could have, which is why he was so caught off guard when he got a pop-up while searching the web. It wasn't the usual "you were the millionth visitor" or anything like that. It actually appeared to be something completely different. It was an ad for a comedy show. The ad claimed to be a virus that infected the computer with the worst comedy known to man. It was apparently a comedy talk show hosted by 2 men, Jason and Dan. The faux virus led to the website, where you could download the episodes that released on a weekly basis. Cody decided to give the show a watch and found that he actually enjoyed their comedy style. It had the 2 hosts running skits, sitting on a couch interviewing people, and other comedy staples. The 2 played off each other very well, and he was finding himself becoming a fan pretty quickly. A new episode was scheduled to be released. Knowing this, Cody rushed home after class to download it. The episode was titled Laughing.wmv. He sat in front of his laptop and clicked the episode. The episode had a different tone than the others. Dan, one of the hosts, was acting strange. He wasn't really talking for most of the bits, and the episode was mostly just Jason making jokes. In the middle of the sketch, Dan just walks off camera without a word. It was strange, as it seemed that it wasn't a bit. Jason had no idea why his co-host left, and decided to follow. Off screen there was a scream, and Jason ran back into the center, with a red patch on his shoulder. Dan followed him back on screen and knocked him to the ground. Jason started to beg, but Dan didn't seem to care and lunged down to finish the job. When Dan was done, he turned towards the camera. He looked almost normal, like he hadn't just killed another person in cold blood. He started to talk. "Cody Stewart," he said. Cody froze. There was no way he was talking to him. Dan continued, asking him if he knew anything about magic tricks. Cody stayed silent, and then Dan said that the most common tactic for magic was misdirection. He pointed above the screen. Cody looked up and saw the light of the webcam was turned on. Had it been on this whole time? He slammed shut his laptop and threw it on the ground. He could still hear Dan talking from the machine. Cody stomped on the device just as he could hear that Dan was saying he was coming for him next, and listing his home address. Cody no longer heard anything from the laptop and decided to call his friend. He stayed at his house following that day. He hadn't been to his house since. It's been 3 months since then, and he hasn't so much as looked at a laptop. The fear that Dan was still out there, still looking for him, still watching. Keep Him Laughing is a story that I think gives away its ending too fast. It had some decent build-up in the beginning, but all that comes crashing down about halfway through the story. There's no reason for anything that happens, and not in a mysterious kind of way. Like, Dan murders his co-host for no reason, and then states that he's been watching the narrator. All of it happens so fast, and there's no real reason for it. We can theorize a bit, though. Maybe the co-host was his last victim. Like he grabs a co-host from the viewers that he's chosen. So the next person would have been Cody. That doesn't quite explain why he didn't see the murder coming, though. There's not much more to say about this story. Let's move on to the next. This next story comes from Necrosleep and was written by the Lonely Wolf 96 in 2018. The story begins with an unnamed narrator explaining how they have never been on the deep web before. They thought about it multiple times but never actually followed through. This was mostly because they had a little bit of trepidation for what they might find. This mainly stems from the belief in the forbidden websites, red rooms, or even just the FBI putting them on a list. Eventually they caved and downloaded the Tor browser. They started their descent into the deep web through the hidden wiki. He started clicking every link that he saw. The rabbit hole was just beginning with him finding all sorts of interesting, odd, and even useful sites. As he was exploring, there was a pop-up that covered the screen. It said, "Click for a treat." Well, he wasn't dumb enough to click on a pop-up on the deep web, so he closed it. This is also when he realized that he had his ad blocker turned off, and so he clicked it on. He continued his descent when the pop-up came back up. This time he studied it for a moment before closing it. He hovered his mouse over the pop-up and saw a weird URL. This is the URL that was displayed on the screen. Deciding it seemed safe enough, he clicked the link. He was brought to a blank screen. There's nothing to click on, nothing to type, nothing to do. It seemed like an unfinished page or something. Perplexed, he clicked off the site and continued his browsing. A few seconds after closing the site, it popped back up again. This time there were faint blue letters at the center of the screen. 2/14 was all it said, but it was clearly a date, Valentine's Day to be exact. Was the site claiming to know who his soulmate was? The text goes away after a minute. The screen is blank again. It isn't long before new text appears on screen. "You will be dead." What? Was it threatening him now? The narrator was spooked and shut down Tor, then his whole computer. He didn't want anything to do with whatever sick joke this was. He put it out of his mind and got ready to go to bed. The next day he received a phone call from a blocked number. Answering it, he heard a deep voice on the other end. "You will be dead. 2/14. Each word was spread out by a few seconds of white noise. He didn't know what it meant. There's no way that the person on the deep web got his number, right? It was happening though, so there's no way he could deny it. He quickly turned off his phone and got on his PC. He saw that he had a new email on Gmail. It was the same link that he had seen before. This is when he made an interesting discovery. He took the letters and numbers and removed the .onion from it. He placed it in an anagram solver and was met with a very familiar message. "You will be dead, 2/14. This story doesn't feel real to me. It feels like a story that knows it's a spooky internet story, so it needs to hit every cliche in the book. I don't hate the premise, but it all moves way too fast and the interesting bits aren't even that interesting. The anagram part could have been better, and I feel like there's something off with the story. It might be making fun of other similar stories. Like the story might be a satire of these kind of creepy deep web stories. If that's the case, then well done. Unbranded Laptop is a story that was uploaded to the wiki in 2010, but can be traced back to Newgrounds. The story is credited to Urban Champion. As the title suggests, the story is about a mysterious laptop that the narrator finds. The narrator explains that his brother had recently gone missing. He went to his house to find 3 pieces of printer paper were taped on his door. His brother clearly wasn't home. A few days later, he finds a strange thing in his driveway. It appears to be a plain gray laptop. The laptop looked to be damaged in some places, but completely fine in others. The screen had a large hole on the left side, looking to be inflicted by a Phillips head screwdriver, and the same could be said for the camera. Examining the laptop closer, the narrator found that the whole thing was blank. It didn't have a brand, no warranty sticker, no proof of license, no text whatsoever. It was as blank as you can get. The laptop didn't even have a charging port, just VGA and USB slots. The narrator takes the laptop inside, planning to examine it further. He didn't expect the thing to even work, especially without the piece needing to charge it. He went to his basement and placed it on the desk next to his old PC. He took the battery out and checked if it still had charge. To no one's surprise, it was completely dead. There was nothing he could do about it now, so he left it in the basement and went to watch TV. 3 hours later, he decided it was time for bed. That night, he was awoken by the Windows 2000 startup jingle, which confused him since his old PC was Windows 95. He shrugged it off as maybe his tired self had mixed up the sounds. The narrator went into the basement and found that his old PC was still off. Strange. And even stranger was that it wasn't even plugged in. He grabbed the old laptop and saw that it was still off. He removed the battery and checked if it was still dead, but instead found that it was charged and making the voltage tester freak out. He reinserted the battery and pressed the power button. The laptop came to life. The screen wasn't working, so he plugged it into his CRT monitor. The desktop was bare, only having 3 files on it. One titled Games, the other Videos, and finally a command prompt folder. Curiously, he opened the Games folder and found a game titled Princess.exe. The game was a very simple dress-up game, but it had you take a picture of yourself or use your webcam to dress yourself up. The game was very simple, but it seemed like a little girl had been playing it. There were pictures of her all dressed up using the game. It was kind of wholesome, but there was another file he needed to check. After running some checks for the computer's specs and coming up empty-handed, he decided to check out the video folder. Inside the folder was videos of the little girl. She kept looking at her computer screen, laughing and running around the room. It was likely that these videos were recorded while she was playing her game. It was almost like every time she messed around with the game at all, it would send her running excitedly around her room. This went on for a few videos until one of them started a bit differently. Firstly, she wasn't smiling like in all the other videos. She appeared melancholy, like she had got bad news but couldn't cry. It was a weird feeling and sudden shift from video to video. The video went from bad to worse as the girl reached down and grabbed a saw from off screen. With the same expressionless look, she began to bring the saw to her neck. The narrator turned from the camera. He could hear the sickening sounds of the saw. Then the sound stopped, only for the girl to start screaming. There was a loud banging on her door, which was just barely in frame. The banging continued with a woman screaming until it turned into 3 people screaming. The little girl continued until she fell face first on her desk. A pool of blood was forming around her head. The family members, her mom, dad, and brother, burst into the room. The mom broke down crying while the dad raced over and cradled the little girl. The brother stood in abject terror in the hallway. The video ended, but it felt like it would never really end. The images he saw would be played on repeat in his mind forever. He looked down at the laptop again and was perplexed. The screen showed what looked to be a dark room. A person stared into the camera. He looked closer and realized there was a video of him staring at the laptop in his basement. Unbranded Laptop is a story that came out near the beginning of the creepypasta craze. It was a story that leaned heavily into what made those early stories great. It focused on a character having a creepy interaction with something he had found. The focus on the gore wasn't that big of a deal, as it was a staple of the early pastas. This story falls squarely in the nostalgic good category for me. I like the story well enough, though I do wonder what the whole point was in the beginning. When he referred to his brother going missing, how was that all related? Also, the ending is one that I'm a big fan of. It's almost like a curse has been passed along since he found this item, a fate that he must now face. Hello everyone, and welcome to the end of the video. This series has only just begun and we're already finding some really obscure stories. A big shout out to my Patreon supporters, Blow and O's, Nora Kingsley, and Icy Dice. You all help keep this channel running. Thank you to everyone who watches my videos, as I couldn't do this without you all. I hope you all have a good night.